Hi book lovers, welcome back to my channel. I'm finally doing my wrap up for November, which means this is going to be my last wrap up of 2020. It was a pretty good reading month. I read about 30 books, so let's just get started. These first few that I'm going to be talking about are paranormal romances because the first week of November was paranormal romance readathon, so I won't go into too much detail for all of these just because I did my PNR readathon vlog and talked so much more about them already. The first book that I read in November was How to Marry a Millionaire Vampire by Carolyn Sparks. This is the first book in the Love at Stake series. This book and this whole series has been on my TBR for ages because it's one of those like early mid 2000s paranormal romance series that seems like everyone has read, but I had not, so it was on my TBR for the paranormal romance readathon. I ended up not loving this one all that much. I gave it 2 stars. We have a vampire hero and a human heroine. Roman is the vampire and he accidentally breaks off one of his vampire teeth, so he needs to go see a dentist, and of course the heroine is none other than a dentist. She for some reason gets involved in the mafia and she's on the run and needs protection, so these two have something that the other need. They match each other well, but I was just not feeling it between them. I didn't really get into the story all that much. I got pretty bored with it, and the whole mental vampire orgy thing was just the strangest thing that I'd ever read, because for some reason when vampires have sex, they can have sex mentally and have like orgies and stuff, and it's all up in their heads, so that was strange. I doubt I'll continue on with the series. It is one of those PNRs that's like on the more lighthearted side, more humorous, but I just didn't mesh well with this book. And then I read Pridemates by Jennifer Ashley. This is the first book in her paranormal romance series, Shifters Unbound. I had already read Jennifer Ashley's other series, her historical romance series, 2 of which I absolutely loved, but I was curious to see how her take on PNR would be. So I read Pridemates and it was okay, not too bad. It's a fairly unique take on this paranormal world. We have shifters and humans coexisting, and ever since humans found out about shifters kind of were segregated into their own shifter towns and they're forced to be collared and controlled. We have a shifter hero who turns into this big lion, and his heroine is a human. Kim is an attorney and her newest client is a shifter. He's been accused of killing his girlfriend, his human girlfriend, and she's trying to prove his innocence, and the one lead that she has is with the hero Liam. There is some action and suspense going on in this one. The romance was okay. I didn't fall in love with it or anything. The hero was not someone that I was immediately in love with, so this one was just an okay start to the series. I gave it 3 stars. It's not bad, but it's not that great either. It didn't turn me off from reading the series like the last book did, so I am curious to continue on with the rest of the series, but it's not something that I'm immediately gonna try to read. Next up, I read our buddy read for the paranormal romance readathon, and that is The Power of Hades by Eliza Rein and Rose Wilson. This one I unfortunately did not like all that much. I gave it 2 stars. The premise is interesting. It is a Hades and Persephone retelling, which is one of my favorite kinds of retellings to read. Persephone, she believes that she's human, but she ends up being kidnapped by Zeus and put on the Hades trials, which is basically like a deadly obstacle course, and if she wins, she gets to be Hades's new wife, and if she loses, she pretty much loses her life. So she doesn't really have much of a choice and is forced to go through these trials, and she slowly starts to find out that she is the actual Persephone who was Hades's wife. She's just lost all her memories and somehow became human, or thought that she became human. It's an interesting setup, but I just wasn't a fan of the writing, and the romance was like barely there. We see Hades for maybe 2 or 3 scenes. He's barely there. The action is pretty poorly done. You would think that because it's action it gets a little bit exciting, but the way it's written is just, it makes it really bland and boring. I just didn't really care about Hades and Persephone, though the potential of their story, it just sounded so good, just poorly executed. So sadly, this one was not for me. Next, I finally read my very first Christine Feehan book, Dark Prince. This one is the first book in her very long Dark series, which are all about the Carpathians, which are, for me, they're kind of like a mix between vampire and shifter. Raven is our psychic heroine. She's able to communicate mentally, and that's how she meets our prince hero, Mikhail. Mikhail is the prince and leader of the Carpathians, who as a people are slowly dying. So finding his mate is a very special thing, not just for him, but for his people, so that they can procreate. I really like this one. I gave it 4 stars, like 3.5 to 4 stars. It was a pretty good read. We have a dark, tortured hero who is kind of a caveman, a heroine who has a lot to deal with, discovering this whole new world. There was quite a bit going on in this one. It was kind of hard to keep track of it all while I was listening to the audio, which was a pretty long audio, but it was a good intro to the series. A lot of people had a problem with the heroine, but I didn't really mind her. I still liked it, and it was definitely one of the better reads that I had for the readathon. And then the last book that I read for the paranormal romance readathon was Mating the Huntress by Talia Hibbert. I believe this was Talia Hibbert's very first paranormal romance, and it was great. It's set during Halloween. We have a werewolf shifter hero and a heroine who comes from a family of werewolf huntresses. Luke, as soon as he smells Chastity, he pretty much knows that she's the one for him. Chastity, though, on the other hand, wants to kill him. These two are great together. I love them. We have a heroine who wants nothing but to stab the hero, and a hero who wants nothing but to worship the heroine. It's hilarious and fun, just a really great novella. I gave this one 4 stars, and it's just perfect for Halloween. Next up, I read The Duke Who Didn't by Courtney Milan. This is a historical romance that was so adorable and so fun. I gave this one 4 stars. It's the first book in a new series. It's a historical romance. It's an Asian romance. It was just a very feel-good and lighthearted romance that I was in the perfect mood for. It's the first in a new series set in this small town of Wedgeford. Chloe and Jeremy have known each other since they were kids. Every summer, Jeremy goes to visit Wedgeford, and even though Chloe and Jeremy have never really confessed their feelings for each other, they are kind of leading up to it. But one summer, Chloe finally confesses her feelings, and for the next 3 years, Jeremy never comes back to visit. So Chloe is not exactly all that happy when Jeremy finally comes back after 3 years, and he's actually back in order to win Chloe's heart. What Chloe doesn't actually know about Jeremy is that he is a duke. He's a half Chinese, half British duke who owns the village that Chloe lives in. So not only does Jeremy have to try to woo Chloe and win back her heart, he also has to find a way to confess the reality of who he is. I really enjoyed Chloe and Jeremy. Jeremy is such a big dork. He's very sarcastic, always cracking jokes. He doesn't take too much very seriously, whereas Chloe, she is a very serious kind of person. She's very organized. She loves making lists. They're pretty much the opposites of each other, but so perfect. It's a very fun and sweet historical romance, lots of food references with Chloe's father creating this new special secret sauce. It's very fun and lighthearted. We have a sunshine hero, a kind of grumpy, stoic heroine. So if you're in the mood for a feel-good historical romance, this one would be perfect. Next, I read a couple Annika Martin books. The first one is Return Billionaire to Sender. This one is the latest standalone in her Billionaires of Manhattan series, her rom-com series. I gave this one 4 stars. It was a great rom-com. I've really been enjoying the series a lot, though I do have a couple that I still need to catch up on. But Return Billionaire to Sender, we have a USPS worker heroine, and that was kind of one of the main reasons why I really wanted to read this. Noelle is a shy letter carrier, and her hero is Malcolm, who is a billionaire. He's powerful, everyone hates him, he's a bit of an asshole, but he ends up being such a softie for the heroine, and that's what I'm a sucker for. The apartment building that Noelle and her best friends live in is owned by Malcolm. He wants to demolish it, so all the tenants are being kicked out. And no matter how many times Noelle and her best friends beg Malcolm, he refuses to keep the building. This is Noelle's one last chance to confront this big, powerful billionaire to try to change his mind, and she gets the brilliant idea to wear her USPS uniform in order to get into the building. Getting a meeting with Malcolm, though, is a bit of a different story, but luck is on her side. The same day that Noelle goes into the building is the same day that Malcolm has an appointment with an emotional IQ coach, mainly for his asshole boss behavior. So Noelle pretends to be that coach, while in her USPS uniform, and as his pretend coach, she decides to set up these meetings, these weekly meetings with Malcolm to show him this video that Noelle and her best friends and the rest of the tenants at her building have created to get some sympathy from Malcolm and hope that he won't demolish their building. Malcolm, of course, doesn't realize the truth about Noelle and the connection between her and the building, but he's intrigued with her from the moment that he meets her. He does not give a shit about the whole emotional IQ coach thing, but he does try to seduce her. It's just so funny and cute because Malcolm, instead of being the huge jerk that everyone thinks he is, he's all sweet and charming with Noelle, and you can see him slowly grow to adore her. It was just a really great rom-com. I gave it 4 stars. I love the whole opposites attract thing with the shy heroine and the huge jerk hero who's a jerk to everyone but the heroine. I just love that dynamic, and I'm just a huge fan of Annika Martin. I also ended up reading 2 other Annika Martin books in November, The Hostage Bargain and The Wrong Turn, which are the first 2 books in the Taken Hostage by Kinky Bank Robber series, and the series name pretty much says it all. Book 1, The Hostage Bargain, I got for free. I think it's still free, but I had owned it for a long time and finally decided to read it because I heard there were bank robbers, some kink, and a heroine who's taken hostage by them. It's a polyamorous romance series, MFMM, so 1 heroine, 3 guys, but it's the kind of relationship where all the guys are into the girls, they're not into each other, they love each other, but they're not in love with each other, and as far as I've read, the guys don't mess with each other. I had so much fun with this series. I gave both books 4 stars. It's a little bit ridiculous and over the top, but it's about kinky bank robbers. I want silliness and fun, and that's exactly what I get. Melinda is our heroine. She lives in the small town working as a bank teller, and she kind of hates her life. She's always wanted more for herself, wanting to explore more of the world outside of her small town and her farm. So when these 3 guys end up robbing her bank, the bank she hates working at, she kind of lets them rob the bank willingly. She kind of puts up a fight for the cameras, but she leads them to where all the money and diamonds are, and she asks them to take her hostage, take her with them when they leave. She becomes their willing hostage, and it is the funniest thing. The 3 guys, we don't know their real names, at least I don't know them so far, but they are called Zeus, Odin, and Thor. Clearly you can see the theme with their names, but they take Melinda along with them to continue robbing more banks, and it's just a really fun time and a great read. All the books in the series are pretty quick and short, lots of good steam, bank robbing, some action and danger. Melinda decides to match the others' names and call herself Isis. They're all living on the run, and they make some good money at robbing some banks. So far I've only read these first 2. There are 3 more books after this, and I think the author is writing some more, but it's a great series. I can't wait to continue reading some more. Next I read some smutty novellas from Mink, His Virgin Heiress, and Marco's Girl. I gave both of them 3 stars. They were okay. I mean, Mink for me is okay. I don't love her, but I still end up reading her stuff. In The Virgin Heiress, the heroine is living with the hero. He is pretty much her keeper, and she hates that and hates him. She tries to rob him, stealing some diamonds that he leaves out in his house that she doesn't know he leaves out on purpose for her because he's obsessed with her. And then in Marco's Girl, it's set in prep school, so the main characters are a bit younger. There's a bad boy hero, good girl heroine. Bad boy hero is, of course, involved in the mafia. I mean, I like these 2 books, these 2 novellas. They were fine for what they were. They're quick, short, and smutty, and that's pretty much what I need sometimes in between my full-length books. And then I read Loverboy by Sarina Bowen. This is the 2nd and latest book in her The Company series, which is contemporary romance with a hint of romantic suspense. I really liked Moonlighter book 1, so I was really excited to get to the 2nd book. Here we have a romance, a second chance romance between Gunnar and Posey. Gunnar works for the company, and his latest assignment is to go undercover, working for Posey at her coffee shop. Posey, of course, doesn't know that Gunnar is going undercover. She just thinks that he wants to become a barista, but Gunnar is trying to find these bad guys who have been using Posey's Wi-Fi at her coffee shop, and that's why he needs to get close to her again. They knew each other years ago when they both worked at this bar that Posey's parents owned. Now they're back in each other's lives, and Gunnar is finding it a bit hard to resist his boss. They try to resist each other because of their professional relationship now, but of course they can't help themselves. Gunnar is a huge sweet talker, and the romance is just so cute and fun. Like in book 1, there's a bit of action and intrigue and mystery involved, but not too much that it overwhelms the romance. It's a great foodie romance as well. There's a lot of baking at Posey's pie shop and Gunnar trying to learn how to make some coffee. I loved it. I gave it 4 stars. I haven't really loved a lot of Sarina Bowen's newer releases. This series is one of the few that I have been loving, and I cannot wait for the book about Max. Max is the owner of the company, and he's just so mysterious and tortured. I'm so excited for him. Next, I read Little Lies by H. Hunting, also known as Helena Hunting. This is one of her new adult angsty romances that she's writing under the pen name. I really wanted to love this one, but I kind of had a hard time with it. I gave this one 3 stars. It's not bad, but it was very frustrating. The main characters here are the kids from Helena's other series. Lavender is the daughter of Alex and Violet from Pucked. Kodiak is the son of the couple from A Lie for a Lie, Lainey and Rook. So this book also kind of connects the All In series with the Puck series. We get to see all those couples who are now parents and all their kids. So our main characters, Kodiak and Lavender, have grown up together all their lives. They both have issues with anxiety, and they kind of both got into this codependent relationship with each other. Their parents pretty much forced them apart because of this, and years later, when Lavender is about to confess her feelings for Kodiak, he rejects her in the cruelest way, and he continues to do so up until they're in college, where Lavender is finally sick of Cody's shit. She starts to stand up for herself and try to get over him, and he's not happy about that. Then Cody's house ends up getting burned down, and he's forced to move in with Lavender, and this is when the years of heartache and angst are finally blowing up. I really wanted to love this one, but this kind of got annoying for me because pretty much the reason why Cody pushed Lavender away was because he loved her too much. He was trying to protect her from him and all that cliched stuff, and it probably could have worked a lot better if there was more romance here. Surprisingly, there's not much that happens on the romance side for the entire first half of this book. There's a lot of chapters switching back and forth between past and present of Cody and Lavender growing up to their current time as college students. So the entire first half of this book is just set up for these two characters, and it got pretty tiring and boring to read. The second half gets a lot better, especially because we actually get some romance, but at the same time, because it's only in the second half, it just feels like it moves too quickly and everything is just forgiven too fast. Cody doesn't really grovel or apologize, at least not enough for me, because he does some awful things for years. So those were my hangups for this book. I really wanted to love it more, but sadly it let me down a bit, so that's why I can only give this one 3 stars. Next, I read a couple old school Harlequin Presents books by Michelle Reid. I have read Michelle Reid before, The Ultimate Betrayal, and I love that book. It's one of my favorite groveling romances, and I was just in the mood to read some more Harlequin Presents, and these 3 were published quite a while ago, over 20 years ago. All of them are just so over the top and dramatic and angsty, which was exactly what I was in the mood for. We have alpha overbearing heroes, heroines who fall so easily into lust with these heroes. So the first one that I read is The Bellini Bride. The hero is a rich Italian businessman, and the heroine is his longest lasting mistress. They call them mistresses even though they're not really cheating on anyone. They're just dating and living and sleeping together, but she's not quite on the girlfriend or wife level. But then the hero, Marco, his father dies, and now he feels like he should probably marry and produce some heirs. He wants to be with the heroine and continue to be with her, but he can't really decide if she is good enough for his family. Antonia is our heroine, and of course she's in love with Marco. She has a bit of a bad reputation because there's this nude portrait of her. There is lots of emotions and jealousy and angst going on between them. There's that classic misunderstanding towards the end that leads to some good angst and groveling. The hero is possessive and jealous over the heroine, and he hates that there's this nude portrait of her because that means some other man has seen her naked. I ended up loving this one. I gave it 4 stars. I'm just the biggest sucker for Harlequin Presents, like old school Harlequin Presents. Sometimes it's just so dumb that it's so good and I can't help reading them. The other Michelle Reid book that I also really enjoyed and also gave 4 stars was Gold Ring of Betrayal. It's a second chance romance between a married couple who have been separated. Nicholas, the hero and husband, believes that his wife cheated on him, and he believes that Sarah's daughter is not his. So they've been separated for years, but now they have come back together because Leah, their daughter, has been kidnapped. And then the truth and misunderstandings are all revealed because, of course, Leah is Nicholas's daughter. Sarah was the wronged woman, and I was just feeling so hurt for her. Nicholas is a total dick, and yes, he definitely could have groveled more, but I still love this one. It was such a good read. It hit all the angsty feels that I wanted, and I also love reading Harlequin presents between an already married couple. And then the last Michelle Reid book that I read was His Mistress Bride. This one is a chic romance, which was a little bit awkward. We have this white girl falling for this exotic chic. This one is kind of similar to the Bellini Bride, where the heroine is also this hero's mistress, and this hero now needs to marry someone who is not the heroine. So in the Mistress Bride, Rashid is expected to marry this Arabian princess, and he can't really hold off the engagement that much longer, except it turns out his mistress Evie, the heroine, is now pregnant with his baby. I'm reading Harlequin Presents. There has to be a surprise baby in one of them. So this one is the surprise pregnancy, surprise baby romance, and the heroine Evie is terrified that Rashid will choose that princess over her and their baby. Again, lots of good angst. I didn't love this one quite as much as the other two. I gave it 3 stars, but it was still not a bad read. And then I read some more smut with Jessa Kane in his custody. We've got a big age gap with the police captain hero. He's her new stepfather, and of course she needs some discipline. It was great. I mean, you all know I love Jessa Kane, so this one was a good one, and I gave it 4 stars. Next I read The Burning Shadow by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is book 2 in her Origin series, which is her YA series, and probably one of the few YAs that I read this year. We're back with Evie and Luke, and sadly I didn't really love this one as much as I did the first book. I gave this one 3 stars. This one though, it hit quite a bit close to home. The whole plot is about this virus that is starting to infect the aliens in this world. It is a flu-like virus, so I was like, oh, okay. The romance here between Luke and Evie moves a little bit here. Evie is a bit hesitant about how Luke feels about her because she's not sure if Luke loves her for her or who she was in the past. There's quite a bit going on here, but I just didn't love it as much as I wanted to. It was just a bit too slow and dragged out for me, so only 3 stars. Okay, change of scenery, but I had to move. The next book that I read was Undercover Bromance by Lyssa K. Adams. This is book 2 in the Bromance Book Club series. Book 1 I really enjoyed, but this one sadly let me down. I only give it 3 stars, and that's because the heroine got on my nerves way too much. I was really excited about this couple because Liv and Brayden were kind of teased at the end of the Bromance Book Club. Sadly though, I just didn't feel their romance here. Liv is a sous chef who gets fired after confronting her boss, who is pretty awful and assaults one of her coworkers. She needs help with finding a way to expose her harassing boss, and that's where Mac comes in. He has some connections with the restaurant world, so they set up this sting operation trying to take down this boss, and unfortunately this operation kind of takes over the whole plot. The romance was sadly in the shadows behind the operation, and it would have been fine except that Liv takes things a bit too far. She has the whole blaming the victim mentality. She's like, why don't these victims come forward? Why don't they try to protect the other possible victims? And she's not all that sympathetic towards them. So Liv, I was just really annoyed by. I was pretty disappointed with her character, and I was kind of disappointed with Mac too. I mean, there is some good banter and chemistry between Liv and Mac, but everything was just overshadowed by this whole sting operation, Operation Takedown, that I just sadly didn't get invested in their romance. Next, I read a duet by Martinez, The Truth Duet. Book 1 is The Truth About Lies, and book 2 is The Truth About Us. I really like this duet. I gave both of these books 4 stars. It's a pretty intense duet. I mean, usually Martinez's books are all intense, but here we have a heroine who is kind of a madam. Cora is a caretaker at this whorehouse and has lived a pretty rough life. She loves and takes care of the girls working at the whorehouse, and there's a pretty big important reason why she stays that you find out later. The hero Penn and his brother Drew are hired as the new maintenance guys for the building, and Penn is also dealing with some awful stuff after the murder of his wife. All he wants to do is find out the people who killed her and get revenge against them, but from the moment that Penn sees Cora, he feels this connection with her. Their romance romance is pretty slow. I mean, these two have been dealt such bad hands in life, so they're hesitant to start anything up. There's lots of twists and turns involved with Penn's whole revenge scheme, with Cora's pimp and his mafia-like family. I also forgot to mention that Cora had a husband as well who was murdered. There was a lot going on in this duet, but I did enjoy it. I do feel like some things did drag out a bit. The series probably didn't need 2 full-length books. It could have been condensed to 1 full-length longer book maybe. Book 2 has a bit more suspense and action with everything getting solved. It's not my new favorite series from Martinez, but it was still a good duet. And then I read the Duke I'd Like to F anthology. There are 5 stories by 5 different authors. I technically only read 3 of them, but since all 3 kind of add up to 1 full-length book, I'm still counting it as a read book. The 3 that I read were the ones by Simone, Joanna Shupe, and Adriana Herrera. These 3 were the authors that I have read and loved before. The one by Simone, The Chasing of Eleanor Vane, I gave 3 stars. I had such high hopes for this one, but unfortunately it was a bit disappointing for me. We have our Duke hero. All the heroes in this anthology are dukes, and our heroine, who is engaged to the Duke's nephew. So we've got quite a bit of an age gap between the Duke and the heroine. It's around 20 years, so I was really excited, but what disappointed me the most was how the hero was pining over his dead wife for way too long. It's a novella, so I don't really want to read about this third character who's not at all involved in the romance, so I just didn't want to spend the majority of this novella reading about a hero who's thinking about someone else besides the heroine, which is why I'm only giving this one 3 stars. The Joanna Shupe novella, My Dirty Duke, I gave 4 stars. This one is another huge age gap, around 20 years again, and this time the heroine falls in love with her father's best friend. She's a wallflower, he's a rake, she's always wanted her father's best friend, so now she's trying to seduce him even though a romance between them is very, very forbidden. Then the 3rd and final novella that I read was The Duke Makes Me Feel by Adriana Herrera. This one I also enjoyed and gave 4 stars. The heroine here owns an apothecary, which I thought was so cool. The Duke hero comes into her shop needing her help on trying to track down his long-lost sister. The 2 of them go to Paris to track down that sister, and along the way sparks are flying between them. I think this is Adriana Herrera's very first released historical romance. I know she's releasing some with a publisher like next year, but this is a great historical romance from her, and I'm so excited to read more from her. Next I read His Beauty by Jack Harbon. This was my first time reading Jack Harbon, but since this one is a Beauty and the Beast smutty retelling, I had to read it. I gave this one 4 stars. It was a great retelling slash monster romance. The hero is an actual beast like throughout the entire book, so you can imagine the smutty times. Surprisingly, it wasn't quite as smutty as I was expecting. There was less smut than I thought there was gonna be, but still the steamy scenes were on fire. Loved it. And if Jack Harbon is writing any more smutty retellings, I'm here for it. Next up, I read Archangel's War by Nalini Singh. This is book 13 in the Guild Hunter series, so we are quite deep into the series now. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. I was so happy that we actually got a romance with a different archangel than Raphael. Here we have the Archangel of Africa, Titus, and his heroine is the Hummingbird. Shireen the Hummingbird is Ilium's mother, and from what we knew about her, she was a very broken character, but she's been slowly starting to heal, and when she's sent to Africa, she's more than able to keep up with Archangel Titus. These 2 are dealing with the aftermath of what happened in the previous book. A huge war broke out, and now they're trying to heal the land and heal the people. But the romance is so sweet and swoony. I loved Titus and Shireen together. They were the perfect match together, and they made such a wonderful couple. Their romance was really sweet, some good banter going on. It was a bit slow, very gentle, but it was the perfect pace for these 2, and I'm so glad Nalini wrote about them. These next 2 I read for one of my recent videos where I read popular books from 2019 to see if they were worth the hype. So I'll go through these a bit quickly. If you want to hear my more in-depth thoughts about them, you can check out the video. I'll link it down below. But the first book was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This was probably the most popular and hyped romance of last year, so I finally read it and ended up giving it 3 stars. It's an romance, an new adult romance between a British prince, the Prince of Wales, and the first son Jefferson, the son of the American president. So like I said, I gave this one 3 stars. I liked it, but I didn't love it. It's enemies to friends to lovers. We also have a fake friendship going on. Alex and Henry get into a bit of a scuffle, and their PR team has them pretending to be best friends. I really wanted to love it more, but I just didn't fall in love with our main characters, with Alex or Henry. They were okay, I just wasn't as invested in their characters as much as I wanted to be. There's some politics going on here, of course, with the first son and a Prince of Wales, but I really liked reading about it. It's very progressive and liberal, but it didn't really take away from the romance, which I appreciated. And the other popular book that I read from 2019 was Marriage for One by Ella Maise. This one is a marriage of convenience romance that I sadly also gave 3 stars to. Rose and Jack, yes, like the Titanic, they make a deal with each other. They enter this marriage of convenience so that Rose will be able to have the building to build her coffee shop, and by the end of the marriage, Jack will be able to have ownership of this building. I really wanted to love this one. It had all the elements that I normally would love. Slow burn, marriage of convenience, but I just was not a fan of the writing. It's very much the telling, not showing kind of writing that gets on my nerves, and I just sadly could not feel the chemistry between Rose or Jack. I just felt like they made way better friends than lovers, which is not exactly what you want to read in a romance. And I know it's supposed to be slow burn, but some things were just so repetitive and boring after a while. We basically just read about Rose creating her coffee shop and that's it. And that's not really all I wanted to read about for over 500 pages. So I wish I could have loved it more, especially since a lot of my friends love this book, but sadly it just wasn't for me. Next, I read Colleen Hoover's paranormal book, Layla. I gave this one 3 stars. It's an interesting premise, but I just didn't love these characters. Leeds, who is our narrator and hero, he falls in love at first sight with Layla, who he meets at a wedding. During their whirlwind of a romance, Layla ends up getting shot by an ex of Leeds, and after her recovery, she's been kind of different. So Leeds decides to take Layla back to the place where they first met and fell in love. They stay at the bed and breakfast trying to help Layla recover, and that is also where Leeds meets a ghost. There's a ghost that starts to communicate with Leeds, and he's trying to find out who exactly this ghost is and why she is communicating with him. He slowly starts to fall in love with this ghost, and there's all sorts of twists and turns going on that you do kind of see coming, but I did like the way that Colleen Hoover played it out. So for a paranormal mystery suspense book, it was great, but the romance was a bit of a letdown for me. Like, I wouldn't really call this a paranormal romance, more like a paranormal ghost book with a side of romance. I just did not love Layla or Leeds, so it was kind of hard for me to get invested in the romance. Everything else though I did enjoy, which is why it kind of balances out into a 3-star read for me. Next, I read 9 Rules to Break While Romancing a Rake by Sarah MacLean. This one was her adult debut historical romance, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. This one was our November book club read for Ravished by Romance, so if you missed her live, I'll link it down below. But here we have a heroine, Callie, who has kind of become a spinster. She's lived a very boring, unsatisfying life, so she decides to create a list for herself, a list to break her out of her shell and to do some more fun things. On the list though, she does have some things where she needs the help of a man. This is where Gabriel comes in, our Marquis hero. The two of them strike a deal with each other. Callie will help Gabriel's younger sister, Juliana, learn how to be a proper lady in order to debut into society, and Gabriel will help Callie with her list. It was a really sweet and fun historical romance. I really enjoyed Callie and Gabriel's characters. Gabriel is a player, a reformed player, which is not my favorite kind of hero to read, but Gabriel made it work. There's some great chemistry between Callie and Gabriel, some great banter between them. It did feel a bit long sometimes, but for a debut adult historical romance, it was great. And then I read Regretting You by J.L. Beck and C. Hallman. This was a recommendation from my friend Lisa, remarkably Lisa. She sometimes randomly reads some bully romances. She said there was some groveling here, so I gave it a chance, but sadly the groveling was not up to par for me, so I give this one 3 stars. It's a bully romance, book 4 in the Blackthorn Elite series. I haven't read the rest of the series, but this one read fine as a standalone. We have the heroine and her best friend's brother, who is her bully, but he only became her bully after Kennedy and her best friend, who is Jackson's younger sister, they got into a car accident and the best friend dies. So Jackson blames Kennedy for the death of his sister, even though it was an accident. I am not the biggest fan of bully romances. I don't really seek them out to read, it. So it does take a lot for me to enjoy one. This one, sadly, I did not enjoy all that much. It honestly could be like a 2.5 star read for me, but I just did not sympathize with Jackson. I get that his sister died, but I just didn't see why he had to bully Kennedy, especially when Kennedy is so already broken up over it. She's barely living her life as a college student, and Jackson is only making it worse. The groveling at the end was such a disappointment. When the whole truth comes out and when Jackson realizes how awful he's been, for some reason the authors decide to skip the entire year where Jackson grovels. So that was a huge disappointment. I was expecting some really good grovel, especially after Lisa said there was some good grovel, but no, it's all skipped, fast forwarded to the epilogue. So this was kind of a bit of a mess. I did want to love it, but I didn't. If you do plan on reading it though, there are quite a lot of triggers like assault, sexual assault, cutting, and self-harm. And then the last book that I read in November was Work for It by Talia Hibbert. This is book 4 in the Just for Him series. I've only read book 1, which I really liked, but skipped books 2 and 3 because the audio for this one was the only one available at my library. This one is an romance between a city boy and a farmer. I gave this one 3 stars. It was good, but I just wasn't as invested in the romance as much as I wanted to. Griff is our giant cinnamon roll farmer, whereas Keynes is the cynical city boy who's dealing with depression. Keynes was a bit of a struggle for me, and also another reason why I didn't love this book as much as I wanted to. He's the type of character who pushes everyone away, and I kind of got a little bit bored reading about that, especially when Griff is such a nice guy. Griff is awkward, gruff, and adorable. I really enjoyed his character. The writing was great though. I did enjoy listening to the audio. I just wasn't sold enough on one of the heroes. So that's it for my November wrap up. Let me know if you've read any of these books. I'll link everything down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye!